Good evening, everyone. I'm going to call this Sammamish Planning Commission meeting for October 6th to order. We've got most of the commission actually here in City Hall, and we've changed the video system a little bit, so hopefully those that are watching will be able to pick up on that pretty well. All right, so let's start with roll call. Mr. Mike Bresco.
I'm here.
Good, that's working. Yep. Jerry Norman.
I'm here.
Josh Amato.
Here.
I'm Mark Boffman. John Bachman.
Here.
T.C. Labby.
Present.
Carrie Bosworth.
Present.
Great. Next, we'll do the meeting accessibility statement.
The public is welcome to attend Planning Commission meetings in person at City Hall, 801 228th Avenue Southeast, or virtually through Zoom. In accordance with latest public health guidance, masks are recommended but not required for in-person attendance. Public comments. Each speaker is allowed up to 3 minutes for non-agenda comment, 5 minutes if representing an organization, and 7 minutes for agenda public comment. For those providing comments through Zoom, once you have dialed into the meeting, please virtually raise your hand to indicate you would like to provide public comment. Your mic will remain muted until you are called on during the public comment period. To give public comment via Zoom, join the webinar via the link https://web.zoom.us/j/828226489. To give public comment via mobile or landline telephone, dial the following number, US +1 253 215 8782, webinar ID 828 226 48794 #.
Thank you. Next, let's approve the agenda for this evening. We've got a couple of land use topics on the agenda for this evening. Does anyone have any comments or changes to the agenda? Okay, seeing no changes, we'll call the agenda approved for this evening by common consent. Next is approval of the minutes from our September 1st regular meeting. Since that's been a month ago, I'll remind you that was our discussion of TDRs. That was our last regular meeting. Any comments or corrections to the meeting minutes from that meeting? Okay, don't see any comments, so we'll call the meeting minutes from the September 1st meeting approved by common consent. Next, we have non-agenda public comment. Like I said, we've got a couple of land use discussion topics tonight, so if you're talking about something else other than that, now's the time. Do we have anybody for non-agenda public comment?
I see one hand up now. Mr. Stickney, I'm going to promote you to panelist.
Good evening, planning commissioners. Paul Stickney here, calling to chat about the non-agenda comment I sent in that deals with the overall underarching issues of growth target and land use for Sammamish, and not the specific two targets tonight, which I'll talk about later. I went to the sustainability conference at Central Washington University on Monday night, and heard two speakers, and it was incredible, the hour and a half. And one of those two speakers talked about a wicked problem, which is where I got that term. And what he was talking about was microplastics and how much they are infiltrating everything in our world. It's very interesting. I had no idea the extent, and they don't have any real good solution for it. The term that I used, wicked problem in Sammamish, is the fact that our community has never studied what types of optimal housing supplies our community needs over lifetimes. And there is, though, a wicked cool solution that I outlined in some of the information I sent in. And in short, when it comes to housing and economic services and transportation, there's a lot of emotion and there should be. But there's a lot of information over time that has been left out of the equation. And the evaluation of that information and then reassessing emotion and ideologies that surround housing, services, and transportation can lead to a place, especially when comparing consequences of outcomes, of comparing what we were trying to do in our first comp plan for 17 years, what's been tried to happen the last 4 years, and contrasting optimal approaches, which set of consequences is best for our community? And relooking at all that is what I call the equation I2E3. That can lead to just exciting outcomes. It can lead to people having the ability to stay in the community over their lives as change occurs. It can better our environment, finance, and livability and lifestyles, and improve our community spirit. So take a look at the information I sent in. I'd like to talk with each of you, but why this matters goes back to 2013 short course on planning. Land use matters because it drives or influences virtually everything we do. I'll talk during the agenda comment, and I look forward to hearing the conversations. Appreciate the chance to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Stickney. And we have another hand raised, and it's Ms. Wichter. Ms. Wichter, I'm going to promote you to panelist.
Hi, good evening. This is Mary Wichter. I've lived in Sammamish over 20 years. And I wanted to just give some statistics tonight that I didn't have time to email in before. Jan Bird, who's been a really long time resident and volunteer of the year and a really super person, she had given some feedback and a public comment about a year ago from ARP. You don't have to belong to ARP, but they have a lot of research stuff online. And I had turned up, when I had looked, something called Livable Communities. And in that, in their statistics and facts, because they have a lot of people who, I think it can be any age to join, but let's just say 55 or older. They have a lot of statistics, facts, and things that are very important. And also the topic of seniors has come up very recently in the city of Sammamish, because we'd like to have a place for those people to live, work, and play, or not work anymore, but play and enjoy their friends and the livelihood they've had. So just some of the ARP statistics are that one, and this is from April of 2022 when I was researching, it says 1 in 3 Americans is age 50 or older, so 1/3. And it asks, is your community livable for people of all ages? And then the next thing it says is by 2030, 1 out of every 5 people in the United States will be 65 or older. So by 2030, which is 8 years from now, 20% of the people are going to be 65 or older. And it says, will your community be ready? And then they have a thing on great places for all ages. And then on their statistics and facts, they have some graphs and charts that show population predictions. And it says, America is an aging nation. The population of older adults is getting larger and older. By 2034, people age 65 or older will outnumber children age 17 or younger. So are we preparing for an aging population? So I just wanted to share that with you because I had thought it was pretty revealing. Also, you might be familiar with the 2020 or 2000, 2010 census statistics. A lot of the 2020 statistics are in. Sometimes the numbers are still getting crunched around. But I recently in Montana, I was watching the community development director give a presentation. He brought up the census chart that kind of shows how the population is growing. And it shows there's very few young people getting born and growing up in the age population because of the baby boomers and people waiting to have kids and stuff is really getting a lot larger. So I think the census information, I didn't have time to pull that in either, but I just think as you speak tonight, we're an aging nation, we're getting older, and you need to think about that when you make your decisions. And then I don't know if it's a agenda or non-agenda topic, but I did send in the upshot, a New York Times article on housing. So I hope you were able to read that or will in the next few weeks if you haven't already. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Wickner, and we have no more hands raised.
All right, thank you. So we will move on to our main couple of topics for this evening, starting out with the first topic, which is a presentation and some discussion on land capacity and growth targets.
Great. Good evening, Chair Boffman, Planning Commissioners, David Pyle, Department of Community Development. I am here tonight to continue in our quest to bring topics to the Commission in preparation for our upcoming comprehensive plan update. The last meeting you heard about a really important topic, transfer of development rights, which is a really important tool in our managing growth in the city and managing development on properties that maybe shouldn't be developed and putting that development somewhere where it's more appropriate. So in following on this series, we are honing in on some of the more important points that you'll be having to consider as we pursue our comprehensive plan update. The first of these is the King County Urban Growth Capacity Study and the King County Countywide Planning Policies Growth Targets. These are largely related to King County processes. However, they are ultimately targets are it's ultimately a capacity number and a target that the city will have to use in updating its comprehensive plan. So while we follow a King County prescribed process to develop what our land capacity is in the city, to study the city, to remove areas of capacity where there isn't capacity based on their parameters, and we ultimately report it out to the county, and the county publishes a final document called the Urban Growth Capacity Report. It is something that we are deeply engaged in with them. There's a lot of information sharing. There's a lot of oversight. It takes years. We started in 2019, and we would attend weekly meetings with the county, downtown in Seattle for a while until COVID hit, and we were doing a lot of calibrating amongst the jurisdictions with direction from King County. So it was a very time-consuming, staff-heavy process that ultimately resulted in a capacity number, and that followed with a process that's laid out by King County called the Caucus process that we use to set growth targets. Before I begin the presentation, there's a few things that I just want to make sure that I get out in the open so that we're all aware of, is that when we're thinking about this, we need to think about first the state context and what the state requires, then the Puget Sound Regional Council regional context in what is going on in the region and what the Puget Sound Regional Council requires, and then pass down to the county level with King County and what the county requires. And in theory, they all should be in alignment. Generally, that's our observation, is that it is in alignment. However, at times there are things that we have to adjust to. It's really, I think, one way to think about it is that the city plays a role in providing housing and growth in the region that fits within what its attributes are. So when the Puget Sound Regional Council sets what is known as Vision 2050, that is the guiding document for the Puget Sound region that ultimately we're supposed to consider when designing our comprehensive plan. How does the city fit into the bigger picture of how things work in the Puget Sound? And as part of that, the city was put into the cities and towns regional group. So we were grouped with 19 partner cities that have similar attributes. Cities like Snoqualmie, North Bend, cities like, think about some others. There are many smaller ones in our category as well, like the Points communities. However, Sammamish is geographically the largest. It also has a very small amount of commercial and jobs. So, and we also don't have access to a state highway, a major transit system. So that's another reason why we were put in the cities and towns category. So when you're thinking about this, and when we're thinking about the comprehensive plan, and you start to see documents like our housing needs assessment and other things that you'll be looking at, you always want to think about what the context is and where Sammamish fits in. And we're in some ways, we are comparable to cities like Redmond or cities like Issaquah. However, in many ways, we're not. We don't have high-capacity transit. We don't have a state highway. So we're in a different geography group category than those cities. So when we think about our role that we play and how we fit in, we always want to think about what our urban geography category is, which is cities and towns, and how that differs from the other urban geography categories based on attributes of those communities. And when you're talking to other people in other cities and other communities that might be your counterparts, we always want to remember that they may not understand that, and they may want to compare Sammamish to, say, Redmond, in terms of growth patterns and things that we should be doing as our role in the region. So I think it's really important to read Puget Sound Regional Council's Vision 2050. Word searching it's a fast way to read it. If you're curious about certain topics, open it up and use the word search tool. It helps move you through the document pretty quickly.
Josh, did you have a question?
I did. I was just wondering if you could clarify for us the category, cities and towns versus what others, what others there are.
Yeah, so trying to remember offhand, I know that there are, for example, high-capacity transit communities. There are core communities. So Seattle and Bellevue, for example, falling in the core communities. Mercer Island falls in a high-capacity transit community because it has light rail now. Otherwise, it would probably be comparable to Sammamish and might fit in the cities and towns category if it didn't have light rail. I guess it has a freeway going through it too, so there's that as well. There are also, so we're actually in the smallest, in terms of thinking about attributes, we're in the group with the smallest cities. The next group is unincorporated King County, right? It's the urban unincorporated King County areas. And no, we were moved into cities and towns with Vision 2050 as there started to be more emphasis on transit. So some other cities that we were in the same categories as in the past in Vision 2040, we were moved into cities and towns, and they were moved into high-capacity transit communities, for example. So when you look at the breakdown of where the growth is to go based on Vision 2050, so what happens is the state issues a forecast for growth, and the state says this many people are going to move to the state, and the state then identifies how many people it thinks are going to move to certain geographic areas within the state. And it says, okay, this many people are going to move to Puget Sound. And then the Puget Sound Regional Council takes that information and then decides how growth should be managed within the Puget Sound. And that's then broken down to the county level, and then the counties break it down to the city level. So the cities and towns group, according to Vision 2050, is supposed to take 6% of Puget Sound's growth. The county then is assigned, so the county has to also provide the breakdowns. I think it's 6% of the county's growth has to be in the cities and towns category. So when you start to look at the numbers and think about how Sammamish fits into that, the numbers are actually fairly small. I believe it's 14,000 units are to be provided by 2044 in the cities and towns category across the 19 cities. So when you start to break that down, you start to see that the numbers actually are fairly low across most of the cities in the cities and towns category. There are some cities like Black Diamond in Covington in the cities and towns category that took much higher targets, that wanted to actually pursue that growth going forward because they had some big investments that they made and that they wanted to financially have work out. You need the growth to support the investment. So that's sort of the breakdown before I began. I just wanted to make sure when you're thinking about this, think about how Sammamish fits into the urban geography groups, and that we're in the cities and towns group with our peers who are similarly situated with attributes similar to Sammamish's, if that makes sense. It's also a very complicated topic, and it is layered, and we've been working on this for years. So trying to condense out what is important for you to take with you as we embark on our comprehensive plan process is challenging. So if I appear to move forward and backwards a little here and there, it's because I'm really trying to sift through, what I've been exposed to for on 5+ years now, and try to summarize it into a concise presentation and allow you to take pieces with you as we go into the comp plan. So with that, I'll move ahead, and feel free to ask any questions as we go through this. There is time at the end. I did receive some questions from Chair Boffman this afternoon, and I've included those here, and I'll be answering those at the tail end of the presentation, and happy to answer any others as well. And I also understand that this might be an ongoing conversation. It doesn't mean that we can't bring this up and ask about it in future meetings, or if you want to give me a call and talk about it, I'm more than happy to talk about it. Sometimes it's easier to have a one-on-one conversation about things and get the information out there. The point here is that we want to get the information out to you. We want you to be aware of what these numbers are, and we want you to be aware of how they fit into the comp plan process going forward. We want to get it out early because we want to have opportunity to talk about it and build an understanding with you and in the community before we start the comp plan process. So thank you.
I'll just mention that I'd encourage everybody on the commission to take a look at the Vision 2050 plan. It's actually got a nice graph and table that describes everything we just talked about pretty well. It's worth taking a quick look at.
They have PSRC has a great website, so by all means, it's a great place to go for information. So the urban growth capacity study, as I said previously, it's a King County prescribed process, and the goal ultimately is to build an understanding of how much land capacity there is in the county. That's a really important piece right there. Land capacity in the county. It is really not meant to be a study at the individual parcel level that would be used by a planning commission or a city council to understand where growth capacity is or opportunity is in the city. We can use it that way, but there are many things we have to consider and limitations based on the formulas and parameters that the county made us use as part of the process. So when you're thinking about this, think about it in terms of the county-wide capacity, and that it is tailored to that purpose. So the first thing we do when we're doing the urban growth capacity study is we build a database of all the parcels in the city, and we get that from the assessor. And we then start to we get that from the King County demography group by way of the assessor, but the demography group has already taken steps to limit the fields because the King County Assessor's database is expansive. So what they've done is they've trimmed down the number of fields that are available for us to look at and sort by to help us so that we don't get lost in that database. The next thing that we do is we study past development patterns to get an understanding of whether or not our zoning is actually commensurate with the density that's being achieved in development. So the question is, say you have R6 and you're building in R6 development, are you achieving R6 or are you achieving R4 or are you achieving R8? Some cities have different levels of achievement in that area. The good news for us is that we found that we were achieving with pretty close proximity to what our zoning calls for. The reason why this is important is because we have certain things that come out of land capacity or out of the land when we develop. Rights of way, for example, are dedicated. We need streets when we're building, tracks for the purpose of protection of critical areas, open space tracks, all those types of things come out of development when we have projects moving through the system. So we studied that, and we wanted to make sure that we were on track with our zoning, and we were. Most cities were. That was a good moment to have, and when we were working together across the cities. We then also clean up the database quite a bit to look at. There's a lot of errors in the assessor's database. It's just the way it is. They don't use their database for the purpose of identifying land capacity. So we had to do some cleanup and some one-off study of each parcel that might pull up an odd attribute or piece of information in the field. So we went through that whole process. Then the fun begins, and that's where we first reached out to all of our partners, so the school districts, the water and sewer districts, our public works partners with roads and stormwater. And we wanted to start working with them to understand where there might be what are called infrastructure gaps. That's a pretty big undertaking, trying to understand where we might have sewer gaps or stormwater gaps or problem areas that might slow or stop development from occurring. So we went through that process, and we stripped out those areas that were seen to be problematic or unlikely to develop in the next 20 years. So within the 20-year horizon that this is studies for. We also worked to identify areas where there might be some resistance to development occurring, and we had a formula to diminish the capacity of those areas based on that resistance of development. So what ultimately happens is you take the total land that's available, you take out the land that's developed, and you move it aside, and then you look at the land that's left to develop, and then you look at whether or not there are infrastructure gaps, and then if there are, and it's not developable, you move that aside. And then what you're left with, you apply critical areas regulations to. So you take out wetlands and wetland buffers, streams and stream buffers, slopes and slope buffers, flooded areas like flood hazard areas. We don't have many of those, just along Lake Sammamish. And you're ultimately left with what is seen as developable land in the city. Then what you do to make it a little more complicated is you add back those properties that are developed but are underdeveloped or redevelopable. So you study things like the land value to improvement value ratio, and if you have a high land value and a low improvement value in the assessor's database, it's considered to be redevelopable, and it's prime for redevelopment. We also looked at areas where you might have had, say, a really expensive house but a really big lot. Well, is it likely that would be redeveloped? Well, if you're able to get 2 additional lots out of it, it is likely that it might be redeveloped. If you're only going to get 1 additional lot out of it, it's not likely to be redeveloped. There are some parameters that the county helps us with when we're doing that, and it's a giant database that you just build on, and ultimately it results in land that is available or redevelopable that is not encumbered by critical areas and is not restricted by infrastructure gaps. And that then is the land you have left. Then you multiply that out by the density of that land, and that gives you the available number of units. There's one other step to it, which is where we add back. So this is a question that came up, which we'll answer later, but we also take the step of removing the properties that are vacant or underdeveloped that have a development permit in the pipeline, under review, waiting to be built at some point in the pipeline, are added back at the end based on the units that are anticipated to be built in the pipeline. if that made sense to you, then that's great, because this is a challenging thing to describe, is you initially take that land out because it's considered to be developed. Even if it's underdeveloped or in the pipeline, it's still considered to be developed. You then add that back later to the land capacity, because that will be developed during the 20-year horizon that you're studying. So remember, it's also a snapshot in time. So the snapshot in time is when the assessor's database was transmitted. That is the snapshot in time that we're working off of. Things are always changing out there in the environment. So we're not always going to be 100% meshed up with the reality of what's happening on the ground. We're trying our best. So ultimately, that urban growth capacity study resulted in a finding of land capacity. This represents the timeline, and timing is important. I think that's a good takeaway here, because when we embarked on this process, we reached out to our service providers. One of the service providers that we reached out to was the Sammamish Plateau Water and Sewer District. The Sammamish Plateau Water and Sewer District filled out a questionnaire, survey, and reported back to us that they had no large-scale infrastructure gaps. They then came to us in December of 2020 and said, hey, we need to revise that report. We've been having a struggle with King County. King County was supposed to build what is known as the North Diversion. It had been in their budget for quite some time, and for all we had been basing and calibrating and designing our sewer infrastructure and our sewer infrastructure comprehensive plan based on that North Diversion to connect our system to the Brightwater facility. And King County unfortunately experienced a major event at one of their wastewater facilities that necessitated diversion of funding in their budget in order to repair that failure. And what happened was, as part of that, the money to help repair that was part of the money that helped repair that was the North Diversion project. So King County had removed the North Diversion project from their budget, and the Sammamish Plateau Water and Sewer District had been trying to figure out what that meant and had been working with the county to try and get it added back or to have some alternatives considered, because we were a growing city and we want to make sure we have sewer capacity, and they'd been planning for that capacity. And ultimately that led to them passing a moratorium in February of 2021. So they notified us in December of 2020, and they provided an updated questionnaire and survey, and they identified that a very large geographic area would need to come out of capacity because it was a massive infrastructure gap identified. So we amended our urban growth capacity study reports and sent them off to the county, and that diminished fairly significantly our land capacity in the city because our town center was in that area. And we then embarked on conversations with the council about what our growth target should be. And in the background, the Water and Sewer District set a moratorium in February of 2021. At that point in time, we had resubmitted to King County our final reports for our urban growth capacity study. And we had embarked in the King County Growth Caucus discussions, whereby we met with our counterparts in the cities and towns category to try to figure out how we were going to divvy up the 14,000 units that were assigned to the cities and towns category. We went through that process, and the city council settled on a growth target of 700 units. That was transmitted to King County and was added in the King County countywide planning policies, which is where the county's city's growth targets sit. So keep in mind that it is a city growth target, but it's really a King County growth target because it sits in the King County countywide planning policies, and there is a policy section on growth. And within that policy section, all of the cities are listed and their growth targets are housed there. We are required to follow that and use that as a benchmark in our comprehensive plan. So the city council settled on 700 units. And at that point, the King County staff and the King County Growth Management Planning Council finalized the urban growth capacity study and issued the urban growth capacity report, which is published on their website. They also finalized the CPPs and made recommendation to the King County Council to adopt the CPPs. That happened in the summer of 2021. While there still was a Sammamish Plateau water and sewer moratorium in place. Then in August of 2021, Sammamish Plateau was able to negotiate with King County the re-addition of the North Diversion plus some interim measures that some were to be funded by the county, some were to be funded by the Water and Sewer District in order to add that interim capacity and take the steps to ensure we would not have overflows from our sewer system, and to take the steps to make sure that if we're adding new growth in the town center and other areas in the basins, that we would have adequate capacity, and that ultimately we would be able to connect to the Brightwater facility via the North Diversion. And they were able to let the moratorium expire. And once the moratorium expired, that then solved the infrastructure gap that had been reported. And the Sammamish Plateau Water and Sewer District again notified us and say, hey, we need to update our survey in response to your urban growth capacity study. But here's the area that's been added back. And we talked to King County and said, hey, you know, this has been finalized. We don't know what we should do with this. And they said, well, it's been published. It's great to know that. Can you file a letter with us? So we sent them a letter saying it had been updated. And later that year in December, the King County Council took up adoption of, so understand that the Growth Management Planning Council and the King County Affordable Housing Committee, which you'll hear about later tonight, are spin-offs that support, like the Planning Commission supports the council, they support the King County Council, and they make recommendation on policy issues to the King County Council, who ultimately then reviews them and adopts them through ordinance. So the countywide planning policies and the urban growth capacity study that was forwarded to the King County Council was finally taken up for consideration and review by the council in December, the King County Council. And at that point in time, there was a public comment made to the King County Council that Sammamish's growth target was artificially low because we had based it on a sewer gap that no longer existed, and that Sammamish's growth target should be revisited. So the King County Council, in order to keep the CPPs moving forward, pulled the Sammamish growth target from the CPPs and remanded it back to the GMPC for further work, and adopted the CPPs with a blank in growth targets for the city of Sammamish. So we are the only city out of all the cities in King County that had a blank in our growth target in the CPPs. The GMPC took it up in December at the very end of the year and passed a motion remanding it back to the city, asking the city to consider updating the land capacity study and updating the growth target accordingly. We went ahead and did that work. Let's see. The update approach was to add the sewer capacity area back, to run some quality control checks on the database because there had been some changes on the ground. We wanted to make sure we were reflecting in the database. And we also just wanted to make sure we were getting it right because this was the second time we're working on it, and we didn't want any mistakes. So we spent quite a bit of time rerunning it and scrubbing it and looking at it all different ways to make sure there weren't any errors. And then we sent back the final urban growth capacity study to King County. We provided that report on the revised land capacity with the previously sewer restricted area added back. So the result of the initial land capacity was 489 acres and 2668 housing units. Let me just make sure I've got this right. Okay, yeah. So that is the land capacity after the sewer capacity was added back. So this is the land capacity that was reported back to King County, which includes 2,668 capacity for 2,668 housing units, and 1,543 jobs. Then, oh yes. Yep. Yes. Let me add one thing at this point, because this is another piece of the puzzle that I think is important to point out, is that for the town center, we have variable densities, and it's a bit challenging to map out what the density will be in the town center. We have what is known as a minimum density, and then we have what is known as a total cap across the town center of 2,000 units, which is the number of units that were studied and considered in the environmental impact statement that was done for the town center. So what that means is that we cannot exceed 2,000 units of housing in the town center unless we do a supplemental environmental impact statement, because of the range of alternatives, that's the preferred alternative that was selected, and that is what was studied in the environmental impact statement. We actually have a code interpretation issued on that and published to our website. If you're ever interested, I'm happy to send it your way. So the challenge here is that there's a minimum zoning in the town center, and then there's incentives on top of that that can get a site up to some significant density. However, that's not a guarantee. It requires that the developer and the designers do things like affordable housing or certain unit types to get them up to that maximum density. So in working with King County requires that we use assumed density, and assumed density is defined as minimum density. So for the town center, the capacity that was shown in the report is the assumed or minimum density. You could achieve a lot more density in the town center than what is reported in the urban growth capacity study, but because of how the study is done, it reports out on what is assumed, what is outright entitled density. It does not report out on what is possible speculative density that could be achieved if certain things are done. So when you see our land capacity study, understand that there is additional capacity in the town center that is not shown there. It's a really important piece to think about when we're going through the comp plan update.
But it does represent the minimum.
It does represent the minimum, which is their outright entitlement.
Which is 2,000.
Which is not the 2,000.
Oh.
Yeah, so this is.
But what is the minimum?
Yeah, so there's some interesting things to consider here. One is there's the zoning code, the development regulations that set the minimum density and that then set what are the incentives to build on top of that to get to ultimately what would be a maximum. And then over here, there's the environmental impact statement that says you can't build more than 2,000 units unless you study what the environmental impacts might be if you exceed that. So it becomes, that's a cap across the entire town center. But you might see development occurring and clustering occurring in certain areas in the town center. So what the minimum is like 18 dwelling units per acre, for example. Is it, I think in one of the zones, maybe TCA, that it's 18 dwelling units per acre. So just wanted to point that out. Happy to talk about that more if you have questions about that. I don't want people to be reading this and think, well, how does town center work in this? It's it's the way King County has designed the study that requires that we only consider what is outright entitled assumed density.
So sorry, what number then was reported out of all of that?
So this slide shows it. So we reported 794 units in the town center. This slide shows the breakdown of single-family R zones, the non-R zones or commercial areas outside of town center, and the town center. So you can see here that the next step in the process, which is a political process, this is where there is discretion on the part of the city. And there are some parameters. There are reports and guidelines that are set by King County that you have to consider, but it's the market factor component. And this is where we are able to consider different factors that might restrict or excel development in certain areas. So we might think that, for example, we've changed some of the development regulations in the R zones, and land economics are more complex, and we are less likely to see the pace and rate of development that we have historically seen in the R zones, and we might want to set a high market factor in those areas. For example. Or you might think that, well, there's a lot of pressure to build single-family homes in the area, and the market's pretty hot, and we're going to keep seeing a pretty fast rate of development occurring, in which case you would set a low market factor. So high market factor is a lot of resistance. A low market factor is a low level of resistance. So those ultimately translate out into percentages that are applied on the back end. There's a model the county gave us to use. So this is where we presented it to the council for selection. Council, what do you say? What do you think? What should our market factor be? So the council ultimately selected the middle range market factor across all the zones, which gave us a land capacity of 2,007 units. And they ultimately then took that number and decided on a 2,100 units as our growth target. Set that by resolution, and we brought that back to the, so take a step back, got ahead of myself here. So keep in mind that our growth target work was remanded back to us by the King County Growth Management Planning Council. And they told us that we needed to revisit our growth target, given that there was additional land available within the area that had been previously excluded in the sewer moratorium areas. So we were set, the Growth Management Planning Council set a timeline for us to work on. We had to have submittals turned in on certain timelines. We had to provide updates to the Growth Management Planning Council, and we had to ultimately hit a deadline of, I believe it was thinking back to 21, 22, it was this past summer. We had to have it done by June of 2022. So we brought it to council, and
Question for you. I've been pushing the wrong button. Do you look at, of the 480 acres, how many owners there are of that property? I mean, that's not a lot of property, so it might be just a few owners of property that have way more control over whether it's going to be developed or not than the city does. And
So-
I didn't know if you.
So
take that
outside
into
of the town
account.
center, we do not have many large assemblages. We do have some larger parcels that are owned by individuals. Most of the large parcels are fairly encumbered by critical areas. So large portions of those were removed from capacity. We also looked at areas where you might see assemblages occur. So if we had remnant pieces, lots of remnant pieces within close geographic proximity to each other, you might think then that area would be developable, where it might overcome things like critical areas encumbrances or small sewer gaps, right? So one of the things to consider with sewer gaps is the cost of bringing in sewer is quite high. So you need to have something of a density number that makes sense in order to make that work. So we did look at that with the water and sewer district, and we did look at where on a map the pieces of property that were considered as developable, undeveloped or underdeveloped or redevelopable, where those were located. And we did look to try to see where we might see clustering of those. And really, it's kind of anecdotal because at the end of the day, the county's looking at this across the county. It's a county-wide study. But for us, we wanted to understand, what does this tell us about where development might occur in the city? And most of the development capacity in the single-family districts is just peppered throughout, and it's a lot of small projects. We do not have very many large, meaningful projects left in the city.
Okay. And one other question was on that marketability. You said you were determining that, or the council was, in 2021 earlier on. Interest rates were 2% and 3%. Now they're 7%. They might be 10%. How does the county look at that? Because that's a moving target all the time. And when we move to affordable housing, things that are affordable at 2% are unattainable at 7% and 8% and 10% and 12%.
So again, snapshot in time. So we talked about pretty much exactly that a couple days ago internally, especially given what we see coming down the pipeline with affordable housing target mandates. So our affordable housing unit mandates in the city, we're going to talk about that next, but that might change the market factors. If we're required to build certain things and incentivize certain things, well, that changes the market factor. So we're kind of trying to figure out what this all means. We're in the moment on this right now. So I don't have an answer to that. I'm hopeful that we will. We have a great relationship with our King County counterparts, and we always have the ability to pick up the phone and set up a meeting or something with them. So we're hopeful that as it becomes more clear how these affordable housing mandate targets work with our growth targets, that we'll be able to better answer that question.
Thank you.
So just wanted to pause on this slide for a minute and just take a look and see excuse me, where the capacity is. So the single family capacity outside of town center, as I said, is really peppered around the city. It's smaller projects that individually don't really add up to large numbers, but across the city do add up. The interesting thing there is that we did, as some of you who are on this commission and those of you who have watched the commission know, we have been through 2 rounds of development regulations updates. So in 2018, we did not have a floor to area ratio. We did not have a setback responsive to home size. We did not have restrictions on grading. We did not have frontage on street requirements. We did not have limitations on how many homes you could put on a shared driveway. All of those things were resulting in some of the patterns and development scenarios that we were hearing a lot about from the community. There were a lot of impacts happening in neighborhoods. We have now been through 2 rounds of development reg updates, and the development scenarios that we are seeing are entirely different than what we had seen previously. So we are, to some degree, in addition to rate changes, as was mentioned, we're also seeing a cooling in the intensity of development in the city because of land economics and how the certain design requirements have resulted in a more complex design on the part of developers, where they could have, the term I used is shoehorn in things on lots that are oddly shaped. They now need more regularly shaped lots in order to make that work.
I have a question for you. So what types of protections are afforded to the city that the math won't spontaneously change? Like we go off and we look at this and say, all right, of the 489 addressable acres. We can put 2,668 potential units. We're willing to sign up for 2,100 of them now over the course of the period between now and 2050, right? Did I get that right?
2044.
Okay, well, I'm rounding just like the council did when they picked 2,100. So we're putting a marker down. What's to say a couple years from now, we don't have the fourth and fifth rounds of development reg updates, and all of a sudden the math changes, and now we're talking about 5,000 units. Like how do we know that what we're actually signing up for is what we're going to develop towards?
And it's really meant to be a guide when you're building your comp plan. What do you expect might happen? I am big on contingency. So with this comprehensive plan, I am an advocate, and hopefully you would agree, that we should have a contingency chapter that describes what happens if many of the assumptions that are driving what we're including for policy in the plan and what we're including for projects in the plan don't materialize or change, that we should be reporting out annually on our progress. We should be looking at how that is realizing what was envisioned in the plan. And if we're not hitting those benchmarks, we should be asking ourselves why, what's changed, and we should have the opportunity we can update our comprehensive plan, our development regulations to if we're getting too much growth, not enough growth. The other thing is there are many cities that are pursuing development or growth targets that are quite a bit in exceedance of their land capacity. And what they're planning to do is to rezone and to make changes to their land use patterns in their cities. And that's something that they're going to take on with their comp plan process, and probably it'll take them 20 years to get through all the rezones, but they'll eventually get there.
But I think that's a city going off saying we're going to change the fundamental characteristics of the city that we manage, right? And I don't know that Sammamish is a community that looks forward to changing the fundamental character of what it is. I know I don't. There's a reason why I live here. And just as Commissioner Norman said, as we're looking at, available stock of housing units, we're looking at interest rates and all sorts of outside factors. Are we shooting ourselves in the foot by signing up for, 80% of our potential, right? 2,100 out of 26 and change, right? We're committing to that number, and town center and other, projects represent a lot of that. Once we green light that, we can't tell them no. We can't say, oh, well, you know what, sorry that you purchased this land and invested all of this into infrastructure and put together all these contracts, but sorry, the sewer's just not there, or the power's just not there, the roads just aren't there. You got to walk away, right? We got to honor our side, right?
And this has been part of the conversation that the city council has had in setting it. So it's been set by resolution, and it's been transmitted to King County. And again, it's a target. It's a guideline to go off of, and it's possible that the growth won't hit that. It's possible that it will exceed it. It's not a ceiling. It's seen as a floor. It's seen as we anticipate we will get this amount of development. It's not seen as a ceiling, and I want to be really clear about that, because in the past we've had conversations, not here, but we've had conversations in the community where people were misunderstanding the growth target, and they thought it was like a debit card where if you went to the grocery store and you only had $50 and your groceries were $60, well, it would stop working. It's the gate. We don't put the gates down to the city when we hit the growth target. That there's many other factors that play there, but I just want to be clear so that there isn't any, if anybody's watching this, any confusion about what the growth target is. It's a guide, it's a guideline, it's a floor, not a ceiling.
Just so I understand what you said a few minutes ago, like this doesn't, it's taking into account some minimums, so it's not really the actual of what it could or what it could be, right? So.
For town center, and I also would say for the multifamily and mixed-use residential outside town center, those are probably the town center. We know because of the 2,000 units of the EIS and because of some of the work we've been doing with the town center codes, we feel pretty confident about what could be built in the town center. But the multifamily and mixed-use residential areas outside of town center, so the Inglewood, the Pine Lake, the Klahani commercial areas, those areas are actually, some people might cringe hearing this, but areas of great opportunity in the city because they have existing impervious, because it's existing development, because it's along arterials that are either somewhat serviced or primed for service by transit. So one of it's also been studied that when redevelopment of commercial areas like Pine Lake, for example, the Pine Lake commercial area, that there is usually less impact to the community because it's already been an area of commercial activity. It's already been an area of higher intensity. An example is the Crossroads area in Bellevue. They, over time, when Ron Shear used to own that building and that site, he started to think about how to redevelop it, and they ultimately ended up putting some standalone 5/1 developments, which means basically you have a parking garage with a 1-story concrete podium where you have some retail, and then 5-story stick-framed residential above it. That's what's called a 5/1, and it's called a low rise also. So we could see a scenario where we fine-tune our development regulations and we look at adding some residential to those commercial areas. And this is going to bleed into the next presentation because we are facing a mandate of about 1,400 0 to 30% AMI affordable units in the city by 2044. And that mandate comes from the state and from King County. House Bill 1220 ultimately is, you can look it up, you can read it, it's linked in the agenda bill. You can see directly where that's coming from. It's not that I'm coming up with some number, we've been watching King County very closely, and the numbers are coming from King County. And they are going to be given to us, and we are going to have to figure out how to account for those. So we're starting to look at areas of opportunity. Let's see, I'll get to that in the next presentation, where we might be able to start to look at adding some diverse housing choices, housing choices that might be affordable, in addition to other things like preserving affordable housing, trying to preserve entry-level housing. We can get into all these. This is a really great conversation. I can get kind of fired up about it. So I'll stop on that now, and we'll.
David, before we get too far on that, can you go back to the detailed numbers that you had a couple slides ago? I wanted to ask about this before that. Yeah, I wanted to ask about this breakdown just a little bit. So if we commit to 2,100. And as I understand it, what we're committing to is developing a plan that could result in 2,100 dwelling units.
By 2044.
By 2044, right. If our plan doesn't necessarily match these numbers exactly, so for example, if our plan, just the easy math, right? If our plan really results in 1,500 in town center, and so then there's, only 173 single-family homes. Now, that's probably a little bit outlandish, but let's just say we still are delivering 2,100. So if somebody's measuring success or failure, is that still success? Are these breakdowns just evidence of how we got to a number, not necessarily something that we're going to be measured against?
These breakdowns are only presented for us to help us envision where these capacities exist. We're really judged by the number across the entire city. So you could see a scenario like you described. In fact, when the town center plan was adopted and when the code was adopted, the intent behind that, if you go back and watch the planning commission and the council meetings, the intent behind the town center was that it would drive development to a concentrated area in the city and provide some relief to the single-family neighborhoods in order to protect the character of the single-family neighborhoods. And unfortunately, the opposite's what happened. Is in the last development cycle, we saw an incredible interest in developing in the single-family neighborhoods, and it took a long time for the ownership assembly to occur in the town center for it actually to start to take off. And now that that's occurring, we're starting to see it shift again. We're seeing a lot of activity and interest in the town center, and we're seeing less interest in the single-family neighborhoods. So it's an interesting dynamic, and part of that is because they did not make partner code amendments to the single-family neighborhood codes, to the single-family districts, when they adopted the town center code. They didn't also do development regs 1 and development regs 2, which would have tempered development in the single-family neighborhoods and pushed it into the town center because it would have been more optimal to develop in the town center. Instead, it was more optimal to develop in the single-family districts and more complicated to develop in the town center. And we continued to see that activity happen out in the single-family neighborhoods. So we're hopeful that we've, through development regs 1 and phase 1 and phase 2, and we have a phase 3 we'd like to do with you all here, that we've fixed that problem, and we are seeing that interest be driven back to the town center where they had originally planned for that density to go.
Hey, Mike, sorry, I didn't see your hand up. Go ahead.
It's just been up for a little bit, but thank you. Just a couple of quick questions. And I think this was in the set of questions that maybe Mark had submitted, but the 2100, that is what we've submitted into King County. So that really is something that we need to work with. We're not really debating whether that's too high or too low. Is that correct? That is our target.
That is correct. So that has been transmitted to King County. The King County Growth Management Planning Council has taken it up and has passed a motion to recommend that to King County. And King County will be taking that up in their next round of review of updates to the CPPs. So we anticipate that there will be a 2,100 unit residential target and a what was it, 728 units? Sorry, I get these numbers confused. Jobs target added to the blank in the countywide planning policies for Sammamish.
Okay, and then those units, is there a translation over to the population growth there? And I suspect that it varies a little bit depending on, if in town center or, single or multifamily, but it would total up to X number of people. Was that calculated?
Well, it depends on what number you use, and this was actually a point of contention that I had with King County in their process, because King County used a per household a number that was lower than what the city had. And in reality, the way it works, the way the whole planning process works is the state passes a forecast of people that are expected to move to the area, and then that gets passed down to the Puget Sound Regional Council, which then gets passed down to the county, and then the county translates that into units using a formula that they have based on a per household number. And our number is, we have larger families, we have more people that live in our homes, and we asked King County that King County consider reverting it back to a population basis so that we could actually properly compare across jurisdictions the numbers, because 2,100 units in Sammamish is very different than 2,100 units in Seattle in terms of people. It's actually, what is Seattle? I think I'm just making numbers up, but I recall it was like 1.5, and I think we're at like 3.3. So you can see how the math results in quite a difference.
So if that's the case, I'm not questioning the target that's been submitted, taking that as a given, but that essentially says that there would be a greater population that could come into our area just because of the way those numbers that King County used, the 1 point whatever that they used. That's correct interpretation?
I think the number was something like 2.2 that the county used. So I think they averaged it across, and they had a reasonable methodology that they were using. We just objected because it didn't truly represent how many people would actually be coming to Sammamish. It was off, right? But really, at the end of the day, they're measuring units. The county is.
To get to population, so that's interesting.
And they're averaging, and again, it's a county-wide study, right? That's something that we've struggled with a bit ourselves. It's a county-wide study. It's not a city study.
Okay. Yeah, those are the questions I had for now. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you. Great questions.
David, one more question on that, not to jump ahead on the housing thing, but in what you just discussed, they're also asking us to make 1,400 of the units that we do affordable housing units. So wouldn't we presume they're going to be smaller than what's typically being built today in Sammamish?
Again, you bring up a question about how these numbers here align with the mandated affordable housing numbers. And in fact, they're saying that we need to build all of our numbers as affordable housing. It's just 0 to 30% is 1,400. Then there's the 30 to 50, and then there's the 50 to 80. And we're supposed to build 0 units between 80 and 100 and 100 and 120. We'll get into that here in a minute. So we're trying to understand the relationship. Again, the King County Growth Management Planning Council hasn't passed resolution recommending these to the King County Council yet. The Affordable Housing Committee hasn't even passed recommendation on these yet. I think they just got through the methodology last week. If you go to the websites for the King County Growth Management Planning Council for their Wednesday meeting, which I think was the 28th, and the King County Affordable Housing Committee, they met the next day on Thursday, which was, I think, the 29th, if I'm right. And you go to their websites, you could actually watch those meetings, and you can watch the discussions about affordable housing. We've raised the question about how does it intersect with growth targets, and as a result of the King County cities collaboratively asking multiple questions, they changed their methodology. Whereas prior we had seen forecasted affordable housing growth targets that exceeded our growth target. They have since aligned it with the actual growth targets that are in the CPPs so that you're not being asked to build more affordable housing units than you actually have in your growth target that was set by King County. So there has been some adjustments that are made. Like I said, this is fluid. It's in the moment. We anticipate that the Affordable Housing Committee will make recommendation and the GMPC will make recommendation this fall, and that will then be passed off to the King County Council in the spring, and that the King County Council will finally adopt the updated CPPs, hopefully before the August recess. But again, the challenge here is that this is out of sync with all of the data building for the comp plan, and it puts us at a disadvantage because we might have made it down the road quite a ways with our comp plan by the time the county actually finally adopts the affordable housing mandates, and we're going to have to then backpedal and redo part of our comp plan. And we've written letters to the county indicating, hey, this is totally out of sync. We needed this information a year ago. What's going on? And they've said, well, this is, it's a statewide crisis. People need housing, and it's a really complicated topic, and we're working on it. And they are, to their credit. They're trying really hard to get, the staff there is trying really hard to get ahead of it. But they've been given a really difficult mandate under HB 1220. So we'll move into that now. I'll move into the questions first. Where do various in-process developments fall? It appears some count toward the 2,100. Are all of these 2,100 strictly new developments that are planned after some certain date? How is Town Center connected? So some of these I answered in part. I would say that various in-process developments, depending on when they started, and remember that it's a snapshot in time, are considered as pipeline development. So the pipeline development projects are part of the growth target. So say we had at the snapshot in time 400 units in process. Well, those 400 units are part of the 2100 growth target because of when the study started, et cetera. How is the town center connected to this target? You saw in the slide where the town center fits in, and we talked about the minimum density being assumed density being what was used as opposed to what the maximum could be under the EIS of 2,000 units. Do we have some conception of where the 2,100 housing units would put Sammamish in terms of a percent maximum theoretical build-out capacity based on current zoning? So we understand the R zones pretty well. We're able to, I could tell you that I'm confident with the R zones that is the capacity of the R zones, unless we change some zoning or changed our critical areas rules or did some things like that, which would be different assumptions that are used in the model. The town center, we know pretty well, 2,000 units, and whatever's left to get there, right? That's the max build out of town center, unless we do a supplemental EIS, which is possible, could happen. The one that's a bit tricky to understand is the other commercial areas, the other non-town center commercial areas. So those are the Inglewood, Pine Lake, Klahani, and there's one also down off the Parkway, smaller. But trying to understand, because those are more form-based codes that are based on bulk and scale and envelope. It's not so much based on what the density is. It's more, you get bigger units, you get fewer of them. Smaller units, you get more of them. So it's a lot harder to understand what the actual capacity of those properties is. We could do a study on it, but I will look into this and I will bring this back at a subsequent meeting, and we might try to do a real short presentation on, what the capacity is and what build out would look like. Because as I understand it, it's a question that's been asked in the past, and I'm definitely not trying to sidestep it. I just don't know for those non-town center commercial areas how to identify what the maximum build out could be in those areas. It's a little more tricky. Our zones, it's acreage multiplied by density. It's town center, it's 2,000 units cap, or you do a supplemental EIS, but the other zones, a little more challenging. What is the time period? Is the 2,100 over 20 years? It's through 2044. So there's different numbers that you'll see. There's Vision 2050, which goes out 50 years, and then King County has a comprehensive plan cycle under RCW 5670A that is a 20-year cycle. So we're looking at 2044 with the one that we're working on, and King County adjusted its methodology to account for the fact that it has a different horizon year than does the Vision 2050. So you'll see there's a translation that occurs where they adjust for that. If you want to know more about that, believe me, it's just boring sort of background information. What counts towards the 2,100? Each apartment, each condo, each ADU. Each apartment, each condo, yes, not ADUs. And there's also we think there's going to be some more changes. There was a change in state law that told us that we can't restrict the number of people in an ADU anymore. So we have to change our code now. We previously had said that the ADU and the single family home cannot exceed the number of people in a defined family, which is six unrelated individuals. So state law has told us we can't use that definition anymore, and we can't restrict the number of people that live in an ADU. We actually just got a little notice from the Association of Washington Cities today that says that it was sent to many cities that says we need to update our code. So it's actually a timely question. What is the risk that the Sammamish Plateau Water and Sewer District would eventually reinstate their moratorium in the face of an action by King County? How would this affect the city's obligations? Well, there's a risk there. I mean, it's happened before, it could happen again. And really, that's when we go back to the contingency chapter. What happens if the assumptions used don't hold true? What do we do? And I think we would revisit the comp plan. There would be a moratorium, and maybe we would work with the Water and Sewer District to understand the anticipated life cycle of the moratorium, and we would then determine what steps we would need to take. And if it was a long-term moratorium or a wholesale change in how they deliver service, well, then we would need to update our comprehensive plan. So we would probably study it that way and then identify how we need to change our planning for our future, because there might be areas that are no longer available for development. Let's hope that doesn't happen. I hope they got their issues sorted out with King County. We believe they do. Please confirm that the 2,100 number is a done deal. It is. It's been passed by resolution by the City Council. It's been forwarded to King County Growth Management Planning Council. King County Growth Management Planning Council has passed resolution proposing that it be added to the CPPs to King County, and we're just waiting for King County Council to pick it up and add it in where there's currently a blank.
Josh, did you have a question?
I do, yep. On the job target, that's based on the calculation of commercial square footage, but I'm curious if we get credit for at-home workers and or home-based businesses, or only those who are stationed within commercial square footage?
Only commercial square footage. Point of contention that I had with King County as well, as we've seen a major uptick in work from home. And what's interesting is those jobs are being reported in other cities. So, you know, it's how the reporting works, where we might have the employee living here, they're here during the day, they're going out to lunch here in the city, but that job is being reported in Seattle. And it's an interesting one. It's one that I've raised on multiple occasions. And they said that they will be looking at it in the future, and I believe them. They're really interested in this shift. They don't know that it's a permanent shift, but it is definitely, from what I can tell, here to stay at some level. You know, and if it's going to go up and down a little bit. The other question was, so the first one was home businesses. So home businesses are not counted as well, and that's another one that I raised that I really wanted to see added, because you know, many cities have a lot of home-based businesses. If you look at the Google Maps, for example, and you zoom in, you see how many businesses there are around you. It's like, I didn't know all those were there.
Go ahead.
Question related to that, to the home ox, do you look at the business licenses? You count those?
So we don't. We would, you know, one thing we're going to be looking at with this comprehensive plan is the addition of an economic development element. You know, at a small level, depending on what you all want, what the council wants, we do have it queued up to be considered in the scoping. In the past, the council has not wanted to take on an economic development element. I understand why, but maybe there's opportunity for us there to start to document those businesses better, and, you know, understand what the needs of our community are, because we do have some issues with code compliance with home businesses that have outgrown being a home business, and they are usually very emotional about that because there's nowhere for them to go in the city. And we need to know that. You know, that's important for us to know. If we need more commercial space to host home businesses that have outgrown their home, that are local businesses, well, we should be planning for that and trying to provide that space here in the city.
Is there a conceptualization of affordable commercial space?
It's a really good question. I've not heard that one, and I'll definitely add that to the scoping mix, because that's, I think you've hit on one where people also don't want to leave their homes because there isn't an affordable commercial space for them to go to.
Yeah, I think that's actually very applicable to the city of Sammamish, with a lot of history around that topic specifically. Mike, your hand is still up. Did you have another question? Okay, nope.
I was just going to add, you guys heard it here first, trademark pending.
It's recorded, don't worry. Carrie, go ahead.
One more quick thing. I don't want to beat a dead horse here or anything, but the language, did it change between 2040 and 2050 in terms of growth targets, where it was once a minimum and now they are looking for consistency? And is that a concern for us as we do take liberty with either up or down as it turns out over time?
So the language in RCW 3670A has changed in its tone through HB 1220, House Bill 1220. And you can see the strike draft if you go on the legislature's website and you pull it up. You can see the strike draft, and it's pretty interesting to read through where the tone has changed. And it hasn't so much changed in terms of delivering units. It's changed in delivering diverse and affordable units that are within reasonable distance from sustainable transportation options. That's really the gist of the new policy direction. And it's also we're now required to report out on it. There's a lot there that we're on the hook for and trying to figure out with this comp plan update.
Anyone else with questions? Are we ready to move on to the next small topic?
Great. And I apologize if I'm long-winded on these. I'm kind of passionate about these topics, so I can get spun up about them. So,
Do we want to get ahead of extending the meeting? Because we still have comment after this, and we're almost at the top of the hour.
It's up to you.
I'm just trying to not interrupt the next thing, despite my interruption just now.
Let's see how it goes so we know how far to extend it.
All right.
Sorry, ice. All right, so moving into state and regional housing policy requirements. As I was previously describing, we definitely need to always consider the flow of where these things come from. So this starts with RCW 3670A and House Bill 1220 being modified. It's then passed down to the King County countywide planning policies, and it's ultimately then required to be accounted for in the city's comprehensive plan update. So when we end our comprehensive plan update process, we are required to take that comprehensive plan to now King County, Puget Sound Regional Council, and the State Department of Commerce. And what they're all looking for is consistency with certain elements of the comprehensive plan, is consistency in certain elements of the comprehensive plan with their respective law or policy. So for the county, they're going to be looking at consistency with housing requirements. They're going to look at our housing chapter. PSRC is going to be looking to see that we're planning for adequate transportation, that we're looking at how we fit in the region, and consistency with their policies. The State Department of Commerce is going to be looking at consistency with RCW 3670A and any other changes that might occur in the next 2 years before the update is due, which there are some that might come our way. So the one thing that's not shown in here is PSRC Vision 2050. There is policy language in PRC's Vision 2050 about diverse and affordable housing choices, although it is not as direct as what was done to RCW 3670A under House Bill 1220. It is very specific in what we have to do, and it was very specific in what the county is required to do. So what happens is the county, the state issues, again, a statewide affordable housing need. And the state then tells the counties what their share is of that state affordable housing need. The counties then, based on HB 1220, break down where the housing need is in terms of income brackets and identifies how many units are needed in the county based on the state law prescribed bracketed income groups. 0 to 30, 30 to 50, 50 to 80, 80 to 100, 100 to 120, 120 greater. You'll see these shown differently, so I apologize. It's a matter of a nuance of 0 to 30 and then 31 to 50 and then 51 and up. People write them differently, so I apologize if you see it differently.
That's a question that I had, because in reading the documents that you gave us, some of them have just 3 categories of affordability for housing and a definition, and then there's 5 in other parts of the document. So which What is it?
It's the 5 that we need to pay attention to. That's part of the change that occurred with HB 1220 was the income groups were became redefined and more specific. Prior it was, I think it was low, medium, and I want to call it high, but normal income. Or maybe it's median income, I can't remember. And then what they did was they went and they added what do we call it? Very low, median or medium, and kind of they stretched the group by adding very low to the end, and then they added a higher market on the other end, and they stretched it out.
Okay, that's very helpful, and I did want to point out to one of our fellow councilmen that said why you moved here because you liked it. And the specific language in that 1220 has been modified to say, regardless of what's acceptable to the community. That's exactly what's written in there. It's like, we don't care what you think. This is what you have to do. It was really manhandled after being passed initially by the legislature. The modifications are we shall and we must, rather than it's a goal and a vision and an opportunity.
So that's going back to one of the questions that was asked is the change in tone in RCW 3670A that was made through HB 1220 is notable and is something we paid attention to. It's one of the challenges that we have with our housing needs assessment, and one of the reasons why that was postponed was because we are trying to figure out how the housing needs assessment integrates with this right here. And we didn't want to get the housing needs assessment out the door before we had a chance to consider how HB 1220, RCW 3670A, Psrc Vision 2050, and CPPs affect housing needs going forward because we have a mandate. So we're working on that. We're almost done with it. You should have that back here soon. I think that's our next conversation with this commission is our housing needs assessment. So that'll be a fun one. So we've been tracking King County's progress on the methodology used to disaggregate the state needs. So basically the state provides need to the county. The county then is required to disaggregate the need down to the local jurisdictions, to break it down. Who is required to take how many units and in what income group? And we've been following along, and it looks like, and I believe I was not able to, I watched the GMPC meeting on the 28th. I did not watch the AHC meeting on the 29th. I've been waiting for the video to be posted, but my understanding was the AHC Affordable Housing Committee gave direction to King County staff to pursue option 3. So instead of getting bogged down by option 1, 2, and what was 4 and 5, we're really focusing on 3 because we really don't need to spend time thinking about things that probably won't be. So looking at that and looking at the Tableau data dashboard that they have posted, and we included a link there. I don't know if any of you were in the agenda bill. I don't know if you were any of you were able to get into it, but it's pretty interesting to dig around in there. This is the number that is shown is 1,468 units between 0 and 30% AMI, 416 units between 30 and 50% AMI, 231 units between 50 and 80% AMI, and 0 between 80 and 100, 0 between 100 and 120, and 0 between or greater than 120 AMI. So what this is saying is that, and we've been trying to understand, does this mean that we shouldn't build, we should be discouraging building of other types of units? And from what we can understand, it means that we need to consider policy in our comprehensive plan, in our housing element, that directs changes to our zoning codes that facilitates and prioritizes development of affordable units in these ranges, but doesn't necessarily do anything else to the market rate units. They can keep building market rate units. And we might need to look at an adjustment to our growth target that considers adding a two-dimensional growth target. One is affordable units that could possibly be built, and then the other is market rate units. We don't know the answer to this yet. I'm being as honest as I can about this. We're in the moment on this, and we're trying to figure it out. We wanted to get these numbers out early to you all so you could see them, start to think about them, and weren't surprised by them later. And we also are seeking guidance on how to start to communicate this out to the public. So questions that you ask and responses that you give us help us understand how to develop communications to the public on this. It's a really important topic that we want to make sure people understand. And we want to, like was pointed out, people to understand that the state law has changed in its tone. And we are being directed to do this, and that there are implications if we don't do this. Implications come in the form of us being taken to the Growth Management's Hearings Board, our plan being seen as out of compliance, and possibly letters from the Growth Management's Hearings Board being sent to the governor requesting sanctions on the city, and the city becoming ineligible for state grant funding. And we do get quite a bit of money from the state. I don't know the exact numbers, but state grant money is important to us. And we've been through various versions of cycles of that with the traffic concurrency recently. You probably have heard about it, where Growth Management Hearings Board found our moratoriums to be inappropriate, and they wrote a letter to the governor's office asking for action to be taken by the governor. And at that point in time, the moratorium was rescinded, and we proceeded on with allowing development again in the city. So it is real. There are things that can happen. There will be people out there in the community that will say, well, we don't have to do anything. Well, I think it's a matter of what you consider not doing anything versus it's become clear that we're not required to build these as a city. We're required to facilitate them and plan for them. So how do you do that? 0 to 30%. I have a, let's see. I put together a graphic for you to understand what the mortgage or rent might be in each of these income groups based on the definitions that are there. So 0 to 30% would be an income of, and this is based on the 2022 median income, would be an income of about $40,000 and would be a mortgage of about $1,000 or rent of about $1,000. That's 0 to 30. So that's somebody who is working at Safeway. Somebody who's, I think I saw Taco Bell was hiring up to $20 an hour the other day. So somebody who's $20 an hour roughly equates to $40,000 a year.
What is the median income over countywide, or where's that number come from?
The Seattle Bellevue, what do they call it? I included the note on that in the staff report. I can't remember what it's called. I'm not a affordable housing expert, so I stumble on this stuff a little myself. So, but it is it's the HUD Seattle Bellevue metropolitan area adjusted median income.
Okay, thanks.
So just so you could see where these fall, and there's also some interesting statistics on that website, the Tableau website that the county put out about the types of employment that we have and in each city, and you're going to be seeing some more information on that in the housing needs assessment. So you might see, I've had a preview of that there are some groups, people that definitely fit into these categories, the 0 to 30, 31 to 50. You're getting into, the teacher category. So there is a need for housing for many of our community members that fit into these categories. So the question is, how do we provide it? What do we do? And that's one we're going to be wanting to work with you on over the next few years.
one little suggestion on your table there is, and I started, you could come see my page here. I have the same table I started, but I think people think of housing in terms of the value. And so another column that says $1,000 a month mortgage kind of translates into a house that's worth, I mean, that to me is like a $200,000 house, I think, or a $250,000 house. Now that's adjustable with mortgage rates and a gazillion other things, but I think inevitably people think of the housing based on the value of it. And if you kind of start talking about a $200,000 house, to me, it makes it actually paints a worse picture, but a more real picture of how difficult it would be to achieve any of this.
We started down that path, and it's extremely complicated. Generally, $4,000 buys you $900,000. But that depends. What is your down payment? What is your credit like? What are the other factors? What type of a loan term are you on?
Yeah, but you could pick
generalize
30-year, 10% down,
conventional,
fairly common terms. I think the biggest question would be the interest rate because it's changing dramatically right now.
Yeah, so we because there were so many factors in that one, we didn't have the time to get into that, but that is one that we will definitely add to the mix going forward because I think it is a good benchmark to look at to understand. I'm interested myself, but I started trying to do the math on that and I ran out of time.
Yeah,
There's so many things going on.
See that the cheapest house for sale in Sammamish is in the 101 to 120% range. You start to realize how difficult a climb this would be.
Which I think goes back to the starter home article that was sent. It's a really good article, and I myself, once bought a starter home, and it's a really important thing. So how do we make that happen? How do we plan for that? What do we do as a community to allow that to happen, meet state law, keep people in houses in the community?
Josh, did you have a question?
Well, I just want to clarify that you mentioned that a teacher would fall within this category, but that number is for a household of 4. And so a teacher making $40,000 that's single is much different than a household income of, so it's a much, I find this very impossible for Sammamish to reach. We'd have to build the entire city with fourplexes in order to reach this sort of like, without doing any sort of government subsidy to get the mortgage rate down to $1,100 for what would have to be realistically at least 2 bedrooms for people. I mean, and we don't have any services up here. We have no transit, really. We've got hardly any affordable grocery stores. We don't have anything up on how does this realistically look? So when you ask about how to communicate this to the residents, can we paint a picture for them? Like, this is what it would have to look like if we were to reach this requirement from the state. What's the real result? Either we're substantially subsidizing these units, or what? How do you get there?
So I think you've hit on the same question we have: is what do we do? And there are some. I think there's I'm out of sequence here. That's okay. Areas of further study, and again, I go back to the commercial mixed-use zones. There seems to be an interest in the community to protect the character of the single-family neighborhoods. That seems to be a high priority. I hear about it a lot. And in order to do that, you need to consider, well, where does this type of growth go? Where is it appropriate to go? So remember, one thing also you want to keep in mind is you're going to hear people say one part of the policy statement. I hear it all the time regionally. I hear it at meetings I go to. And remember that there is a complete policy statement at play here, and that is to provide housing provide diverse and affordable housing options near sustainable transportation alternatives, or provide I guess it's more provide diverse and affordable housing alternatives within reasonable proximity to sustainable transportation options. And that is the full policy statement. So when you're hearing that, it's not go put a bunch of 0 to 30% out in the middle of R1 land where there's no option for transportation. The direction that we're being given is to look at the best place to try and locate diverse and affordable housing choices for people, so that we could start to wean ourselves off of the reliance on the automobile.
Go ahead, Jerry.
In reading the material you sent out, I think it was even specific within a half mile of the transit station, et cetera.
There's
And I wanted to
definitions,
point out
definitely,
that
yes.
This isn't a mortgage payment number, that this is all-inclusive housing costs other than the telephone. So it's all utilities included, the whole 9 yards. So it's a very interesting challenge, if you will. And as interest rates tick up every quarter point, throws thousands of people out of the mix relative to being able to buy that house. $240,000 mortgage today is, with 20% down, a $300,000 cost with 20% down is $1,440 a month, plus $7,000 in loan fees. So it's, it knocks the $40,000 person can't touch that. They won't. The math doesn't work, and I don't know what the state nor the county thinks they're going to do if the rates again go up to 8 and 10 and 12%, which they've done, and then the developers turn it off. They don't build anything. We've set on hundreds of units capability on land, and then done nothing because the rates pop up and the math doesn't work. So that gets back to, is it a plan? Yes. Do we intend to do something good? Yes. But, every city is going to face the same problem. So the state isn't going to have the governor come down around and spank everybody. That isn't going to happen.
So it's how do we plan for this? How do we show in our comprehensive plan, in our housing element, that we are in alignment with state law, Vision 2050, and the King County CPPs and the targets that they've set? And how do we show that we are reasonably accommodating and planning for that? And we might even hear from some others that we should be going one step further and incentivizing it. It doesn't say that in the state law or in the CPPs, but we might be asked to do that. So how do we do that? And that's where we start to get into where are our areas of opportunity. And when we look at these, they fit the whole policy statement. You could build on them, assuming that you could figure out a way to work with the landowners. And if the landowner was interested, again, it goes back to that same statement, is if the landowners aren't interested in working with developers or not-for-profit housing developers to build on their land, we can't force that to happen. So it's that same conundrum of, well, we've got policies that promote it, but it just never happens. So, we're interested in learning more about these areas. We're also interested in learning more about what could be in the town center, and if there's opportunity for us to turn the dials on some of the bonuses that are available on top of the base density that we talked about, the minimum density. So that's an area of opportunity.
I think John had a question. Did you have a question, John?
Yeah, so far I've talked about starter single family, but your areas of interest would lend more towards higher density apartments, condos, possibly townhouses. Is that sort of the thinking at that lower end?
Yeah, so we talked about this some months ago in a planning commission meeting. I don't know if you guys recall that, where we talked about there are some concepts out there that would work pretty well in these commercial areas where you could look at adding incentives, changing the zoning to the actual commercial areas themselves, working with the landowners. But then you could add what we would call ring transition areas around them, say 1,000 feet around that area that's zoned commercial business or neighborhood business or something. And within that 1,000-foot area that is walkable, it could be 2,000 feet, whatever we decide on, you would allow for much higher density in a single family or multifamily residential setting. That's where you'd start to see the starter homes, the townhomes, You'd see, so you could look at how to make a walkable area where, and then you could focus transit in those areas so that you're not buying a very extensive transit system. You're focusing your transit on where it needs to be served. And then you could meet that policy statement of diverse and affordable housing choices in areas within reasonable proximity to sustainable transportation options.
Go ahead, TC.
Sorry, it's my schooling kicking in. I'm not allowed to speak until I'm called on. How does any of this planning take into account kind of the growing gig worker economy? Like, I know in my neighborhood, just anecdotally, I see a lot of stuff getting dropped off, a lot of like the Uber Eats and things like that. You know, we're going off trying to figure out how we're going to make a community more walkable, more accessible. But the reality is, I think a lot of people are just picking up their phone. So instead of jumping in their car, they're having somebody else jump in a third-party car to deliver it to your house. Like, does that play into this at all?
I haven't heard regional conversations on that yet. I think it's a really good question. I actually read an article the other day about how employers should be more worried about the side hustle than quiet quitting. And, you know, I think it's exactly what you're saying is that it's a changing economy and a changing world. And we're a little behind the curve in planning. I mean, I think we're slow to pick up on some of these trends, and we're really interested in learning what you see out there so that we can think about it and include policy statements at least on how we're going to try to handle that.
Okay. What else you got on this?
I do have a real question on it, if you don't.
I have one.
Okay.
I have actually not a question, but I would make a comment that I think that we should pay attention to the wording here that is diverse and affordable, because there's a lot of people in the community, and I am in alignment with this idea that it is achievable and desirable to have more diverse housing choices, especially when you talk about seniors and others, and that may not be as related to affordability. And so the conversation can get kind of convoluted between the two. Usually I think affordability typically comes with diversity, but not necessarily. And so there are people who will really advocate for more diverse choices that may not actually be advocating for affordability. They're more interested in diversity. And so that we don't end up with the kind of the 6-bedroom McMansions that we've seen. We get some that you could classify as starter houses or retirement cottages or whatever. And I just encourage that we kind of pay attention to that, because I think there's people in the community that will make comments about it and have concerns about it and have questions about it. And they're more concerned about different housing choices than they are about affordability.
It's a great point. You know, one thing we've heard, we've seen possibly coming forward in the next legislative cycle is changes to condominium laws that would allow you to condominiumize your house. So you could develop a, you could build an ADU on your house and condominiumize it and sell it. And, you know, that's a whole new range of diverse and affordable housing choices. The first step was changing the requirement for how many people could live in the ADU. And the next step will likely be that they'll start to allow condominiumization of ADUs on single family lots for the purpose of real property sale.
Go ahead, Jerry.
How do the homeowners association CC&Rs get impacted with the state saying, you know, a single family lot you can build 4 units on instead of 1, or you could build an ADU on it? Does it trump the CC&Rs, or is that unresolved?
That's a really good question. So there has been some study on how inappropriate CCRs, you know, old remnant CCRs regarding, you know, race or creed or not having chickens or these kind of things on, you know, that exist on land. They're out there. They're unenforceable. And I think, you know, the state could could say that because state law supersedes, in some cases, the statewide interest and the public interest supersedes, possibly they're not enforceable. I don't know. That's a really good question of how that would play out. I have to ask legal that because there are some other CCNRs that we've seen that are unenforceable, that are more recent ones that have been added that aren't race or creed or chickens or things like that, that have been seen. We've had some HOA battles in this community, and HOA isn't always able to enforce some of the things that were on a plat from, say, 1990 or something like that.
Carrie, did you have something?
Yeah, just to your point, Mark, I was talking to someone today, and an easy way maybe to keep both in perspective is to talk about affordable housing plus housing affordability. And so it's just transposing those two words and keeping them both in mind. And that takes care of the kind of two different possible groups. So housing affordability could be the diverse, and affordable housing is more what's coming down from state. Does that work?
I'm almost envisioning a graphic with the word housing on both ends and affordability in the middle. Kind of, housing affordability, affordable housing. Somehow, that is a great way to start to frame it. Yeah. I mean, there are people who are better at framing than I am, but I like that.
I see a Venn diagram in our future. TC, maybe now would be a good time to pick an end time.
We want to go with like 30 minutes just to, all right. Move to extend the meeting an additional 30 minutes.
Second.
So I moved and seconded to extend to 9 o'clock. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed, no. Thank you.
Jerry opposed.
Okay, Josh, I think I remember that you had a question. Is that
Yeah,
right?
just the last one. So, how is the state measuring success, or better, like, say, for example, we were to rezone all those locations you mentioned with mixed use, and we still did not meet the affordability threshold set by the state or set by the county for the targets we hit. Where have we failed? Where have we done good enough? Nice try. I mean, how is that measured for us?
So there is one proposal that was put forward by King County staff and is likely to happen, and that is that the city could join in being a pilot city with the county. And the idea that, as I've heard it, is that you could be a pilot city to send your comprehensive plan to the county early so that they review it and determine whether or not it's compliant with the housing requirements. And they work with you to help develop ideas and policies and things. It's kind of like a model to some degree. And then you would get some insulation from whether or not it actually resulted in the affordability that the county is requiring you to provide. So the idea there is that if you partner with them and work as a pilot community, that you try and do all the things that you think should be done and that they think should be done that fit for the community, then you may be able to be afforded some level of insulation later if it doesn't materialize. And we would very much like to consider that because, we don't want to be caught in a constant update cycle every year when reporting is due and they find that we're not achieving the numbers and, well, why aren't we achieving the numbers? And it's a big expense to us, as we're in the budget cycle right now and we're considering what sustainable staffing looks like in terms of the budget that we have available going forward and what the long-term operating costs are. We would be looking at cuts, staffing cuts right now, if we were to be sustainable in our budgeting. So, when we're considering that, we need to be thinking strategically going forward to do things that are going to ensure that we're not going to have to spend a lot of staff time at our expense redoing housing policies, redoing our zoning in order to try and somehow make that housing materialize that the state and county are telling us that we're required to provide, if
So
that makes sense.
At an interval, our housing, this is reviewed, and then we have to go back to the drawing board if we're not hitting our marks. But it takes time for these things to start, happening. So is there a period in time where it starts to get reviewed, and then if we're not hitting marks, then you've got to adjust it, or?
I think that's to be determined. We're waiting to see what some of the other policies are that are provided in the CPPs or amended with the CPPs that start to dictate how the reporting and the evaluation works. Is it annual? Is it, is it 5 years? I can't recall. It might be 5 years. I'm not in tune with that specific section yet. But there will be a reporting timeline, and there will be an evaluation, and then there will be a revisiting if you're not hitting the benchmarks that you're supposed to be hitting.
Okay. Thank you.
Some of the low-income housing projects that have been built in different areas of the country have obtained property tax exemptions for 10 years and 15 years and 20 years. Is that something that the staff's versed on that could help be one of the components for solving that problem here to help lower the cost?
Yes, so we partner with Arch, and we pay Arch dues, and Arch is actually an extension of our staff, and they're very well versed in that. So they would be our expert, our material or our topic expert on that, and they will be participating in our comp plan update with us. So we are interested in that as well. Another topic that is been raised regionally is that there is a levy option in the state law that allows for cities to levy. I can't remember what the percentage is, but to be able to raise quite a bit of money to build affordable housing. It has to be, initiated by the council, passed by vote. So there's that option. There's also an option that recently Arch, a regional coalition for housing, who we are a member of and who we engage with quite a bit on housing issues, they held a focus group with elected officials, and 2 of our council members participated, and the focus group was on how do you provide for a continual revenue stream. There's a better term for it than I use, but it's a ongoing revenue stream for affordable housing construction in the region. And the favored option that came out of that was, and there's an option for this in state law, is an additional REIT percentage. I don't know what exactly the percentage was, but that REIT would go towards affordable housing construction in each of the respective jurisdictions where it was collected. That was the favored one. It was not favored to do a levy. There were other options that were looked at, but we also could look at the property tax exemption programs, and there's quite a few of those out there as models that we could look at. So it's a good one.
John?
I'm glad you mentioned Arch. Been around a long time. Your idea of the contingencies in this update, I think, is going to be critical with changing traffic patterns, employment patterns, housing. I don't think we've seen a period of change like this since shortly after World War II. And so we just don't know.
Yeah, and if you have ideas about what to include, how to do that, we're all ears, because this is a learning experience for us as we go through this, and wanting to make sure we try to get it right.
One other kind of question I had is so from my perspective, my sense of it is that we're given a mixed message, and that we're being told, here's your allocation of housing, and then, from the other side of the room, we're being told, and by the way, you have to build all affordable housing, and we don't care what else you do, but you have to build this much. Right, we're getting kind of a mixed message, which starts to me to feel challengeable, and that makes me wonder what your counterparts and what our other city counterparts, what's their reaction so far to this, and you know, it's easy for us to focus on ourselves and think we're in this alone, but I'm assuming others are in the same boat.
So if you look at the other alternatives that are on that linked Tableau page that we sent out, and you look at option 1 and option 2, we're actually fairly, if we were to get one of the three is the least impactful to the city. There was quite a discussion going on regionally about what they were calling fair share, and that didn't really seem like the right term to be using because it was kind of judgmental to cities based on what their character was. And they changed that to, you know, what your allocation is, your there's a term for it, but something allocation. So they stopped using fair share and they started using a more appropriate term. But there is regionally, from cities that have a lot of affordable housing and that don't see a lot of high market housing being built, a bit of a judgment on other cities that don't have any affordable housing, that those cities are not doing their fair share. And that's where that terminology comes from. So amongst our city peers, those that have been doing a lot of affordable housing and have a lot of affordable housing are definitely in favor of seeing some of the other cities that haven't been providing that role take on that role. And if you start to look at some of the graphics and tables in that Tableau website that I sent out, I mean, I'd really spend some time in there and dig around a little and take a look at it and contrast what the different cities are required to do. You'll see that under option 3, a city like, say, SeaTac, for example, is required to build lots of 100 to 120% housing. So if you start to look at what's going on, you'll see that they're trying to, and I included a bar chart in the agenda bill that identified what the target was across the county. And I don't want to use the word homogenize because I don't really think that's appropriate, but it's kind of like homogenizing every city so that you have the same amount of each bracketed income group of housing available. And it's taking a very broad brush approach across the entire county. And those cities that have traditionally been providing that role are advocating that other cities that haven't been should be doing it. And the King County Growth Management Planning Council, if you watch the meetings, if you go back to June of last year and you read some of the materials and you look at which members of the GMPC are proposing those amendments, you'll start to see where it's coming from. So I would say that we're hearing two messages, but that is because it's out of sequence. And one of our biggest challenges and one of my biggest criticisms of the county is that they have caused this out of sequence process to occur where they adopted the CPPs, the revised CPPs that are supposed to guide our comprehensive plan update were adopted in June of 2021. We're supposed to be able to rely on those in order to consistently know what we're expected to do with our comp plan update. Well, what they did was they adopted them, but they also included this statement. If you read the, and I think I linked, it's GMPC's motion 21 something, I can't remember. I linked it to the agenda bill, but if you read down in that motion to the bottom, to the tail end of that motion, you'll see what's going on, where they're saying, oh yeah, we're updating these updated CPPs, we're recommending them to the King County Council, we think these are great, but oh, by the way, we've got all this work we need to do on affordable housing because the state needs to give us a number, and so on and so forth. And so we now have these two targets that we're trying to hit. One is the updated CPPs that we typically in a normal, this is my third cycle of comp plan updates that I've been through, we normally are able to rely on those updated CPPs to start the comp plan update and to work through it, and we have consistency through the whole thing. And what we're left with now is this fragmented approach where it's like, oh, cities, start your comp plan updates and use all these CPPs, but oh, by the way, there's going to be wholesale changes in your housing elements, but we don't know what those policies are yet. So stay tuned. We'll get to it in the county will probably adopt them in the summer of 23, but it might be December of 23. We don't really know. And meanwhile, our comp plan is due in the end of 24. So, we're troubled by this because we want to be out there on time, on target, on budget. But in order to do that, you need some predictability, and we don't have any of that right now. So we're bringing it to you early. I'm a little stressed out by it. I apologize, but it's because I don't know what is going to be expected of us yet. We're learning as we go, and that makes it difficult to do a comp plan update. So just so you know where we stand and what we're trying to navigate that. But you're right, we're hearing mixed messages, but I think it's mostly because it's out of sync in what they're doing.
Final question, but we have had somewhat, we have had affordable housing targets in the past that were not insignificant. Is that correct?
Yes, although those affordable housing targets were the tone of state law and the tone of the King County CPPs as to how those would be implemented was very different. There's very different words. Now it's if you go through the strike draft, you'll see where the words changed. So we're also being given an assigned affordable housing target from the county now.
Because how many have we actually done? I know the answer, I think.
Very few. And I'd also say it's how many has the market provided. So, there's that factor as well, as the city could produce policy and design codes, but at the end of the day, we rely on the market to build it, which is why there's a renewed and expanded conversation about continual funding for it to actually be subsidized or built by public funding.
Your packet said that there's one of the reports on data for housing is due tomorrow from the state, the 7th.
Yep.
I don't know that you're going to see it, but I'm saying when you get that, is that something that you'll share with us so we can read and understand it before we discuss it?
Yeah, so the county has been following the state and been in very close communication with the state, they've been trying to, they're equally troubled by the fact that the state is supposed to give them this number, but the state has delayed it on numerous occasions. So the county is kind of in the same position we're in, where they're troubled by that as well. But the county has been working closely with the state, and I believe them to be fairly close on what they estimate that number will be, which is why they're able to start to do all this work, because they've been forecasting what that might be. But yes, we will circle back around on that. I think it's even if it's not a topic at a meeting, it's something we could send the commission just so you're aware of what the state forecasted need was that was issued finally.
I guess the final thing I'd say, David, thanks. This feels very much to me like one of those situations where everybody agrees that we need to provide more affordable housing in the region. There's really no question about that. We're all in heated agreement. But since nobody knows what to do, it's been delegated from the top down, and we're sort of the end of the line, and still nobody knows what to do. So it'll be interesting to work on figuring out what we can and can't do and what might make sense.
And part of the reason why we are so eager to pursue a housing needs assessment and a housing action plan is because of this. So we saw an opportunity for a grant from the state to study it, and we applied for the grant, got the monies, got a great consultant working on it, and we're moving through the community profile part, the need, but we need to make sure to roll this into it so that we can then start to look at alternatives. And the challenge of the housing action plan is to find the intersection of the state and county mandated affordable housing targets and where they intersect with the local identified housing need, identified through the community profile and the survey, and ultimately how we are able to identify actionable items that will produce housing that is acceptable to the community to meet the needs. And it's a big challenge, and we're looking forward to working on that a little more here through the HNA and the HAP, the HAP process. So.
To what extent is this kind of introduced to and involved in the council, not just the planning commission? I think that this is a big enough topic, it would be important that we work lockstep.
Yeah, we do plan to queue this up for council probably a little later in the year. I'm thinking, we're really occupied by budget at the council level right now. That's a really big topic. So we're hopeful to find some opportunity to get this in front of them. It may be until January until that opportunity arises, just because of there's quite a bit of traffic at council meetings right now, and it's more challenging with a topic like this to get some screen time in the middle of budget. So,
all right, thank you, David. Good to see you in the real.
Thank you, and I apologize for the cough. I came off of a few weeks ago. I'm well in the clear of bad COVID experience and the remnant. So.
All right, let's move on and do agenda-related public comment.
All right, and I have one hand raised. Ms. Wichter, I'm going to promote you to panelist.
Hi, this is Mary Wichter. I live in Sammamish. Good discussions, and thanks for all the staff answers to questions and the materials that were written up. It's a lot of numbers to go through. I'm just going to throw some things in there. I mostly do stormwater, but stormwater, water, and sewer are definitely related to growth. So I do read quite a bit about housing. And just for your information, I do attend quite a number of virtual meetings in Bozeman, Montana, where I grew up. They have a similar size city and quite a bit of similarity with what we do here. So the first thing is if you did not read the starter homes article, it's the upshot from the New York Times article by Emily Badger. It has a lot of photos in it about different styles of homes, and just of all the stuff I've read in the last year or two, it kind of put it all in one article. So I think that's really worth reading. Also behind me is a picture from Opticos Design. If you haven't read about missing middle housing, David Pyle talked about the low-rise houses, the 5-to-1 stick-built items. You can see those and you can learn more about those. Daniel Paralak is also quoted in the New York Times article, and he's written the book on the missing middle housing. So it's a really good thing to read. And I know I haven't spoken with Deputy Mayor Lamb independently, but I know a lot of those topics have come up in the things that she's written up in reports. Also wanted to thank Carrie Boswick for mentioning affordable housing and housing affordability. So I've been attending city meetings since about 2015, and Paul Stickney was there like a year and a half before me. And when I first met Paul, I was like, why do you go to meetings? And the second time I was like, oh, you're the affordable housing guy. And he goes, not affordable housing, housing affordability. He goes, it's a bigger, wider thing. And I was like, yeah, affordable housing is the lower end where you need subsidies to be able to do things. And housing affordability is the range of homes that you offer so that you get more of it. And I think we can do a lot more with housing affordability. And I honestly, from all the stuff that I hear and all the meetings that I've been attending, at least for the last 2 years here and in Montana, it's very hard to do affordable housing. My husband's also international, and he's from Sweden, and he's lived a lot of places in Europe. And it's really hard to do the affordable housing well, and usually you need a subsidy for it. So that would be interesting. Also, he noticed today on Seattle Times, there's an article on micro apartments. I believe there's 23 properties that have about 1,402 apartments. And the lowest end one of those, the average square feet is 177 square feet. And they're trying to get the rents at $921 a month. But that actually includes internet, utilities, and other things. So that's a little experiment going on in Seattle. We can see how that works out. The thing I wanted to talk about the most is David Pyle and the Bulletin spent a lot of time on the SPW sewer moratorium and capacity. So I'm going to speak with that because I have been attending those meetings as well since about through March of 2015 as well. So it's been about 7 years. Sammamish Plateau Water does a water comprehensive plan. Water appears most places in the city. They aren't having problems with that. They know what capacities are. And I don't know when the last water comp plan was, but the wastewater comp plan, they did one in 2003, one in 2013, and they just have done 7, 8 to 10 meetings on the current one that's going to be going out for review for the next 30, 60, 90 days. And for sewers, you have to know what the land capacity is theoretically. You have to know what gets built, because when you put that pipe in town center that the city said, please do your project with ours because we want it all there at one time, they have to calculate out what could be there, and they have to put the right pipe sizes, and they don't want to spend a lot of money putting too many other pipe sizes. So I will assign an action item to David Pyle or other city staff. Please talk with SPW, because Jay Regan Strive for other people, they know what those numbers are. And I didn't have time to look them up, and it's just me talking. But I'm going to tell you that the numbers that I've seen are we can do like 7,000, maybe 7,200 units. And those would be single family homes. So if you did multifamily, they don't even use the same amount of sewer capacity. So it could be more. The reason that they got into the moratorium is the King County was going to do the north diversion. Then when they heard it wasn't going to happen, SPW said, we don't want to have sewage overflow. So they looked at the North Lake Sewer Basin and they said, hey, we're just not going to give people stuff right now because we don't want to have an overflow. But I never heard SPW say that they were reducing the capacity of land for the city of Sammamish. And while they had their little brief moratorium from February to August and they let it expire in August, they said, what are the things that we can do? So they came up with immediate solutions, which I believe are implemented or almost all implemented. They came up with interim solutions, which they are implementing and should have done by February or June of 2023. They are giving certificates of availability for sewer, and they're just stamping them that you can't actually physically attach till that February or June date if you're in those areas. They have not had any sewage overflows. The only one they had was a recent one, which was in South Sammamish due to tree roots going around a septic thing. So you're not going to hear them pull back. They also, because SPW plans so well for future water and for future sewer, they looked at A1 through A6 projects. And I think it's A3, like if the King County never does a north diversion or doesn't want to build it, they think that A3 or A6, I can't remember if I know the number directly, that it would be able to take everything south. So we are not going to have a sewer capacity problem. So it's really important that you understand we could have up to 7,000 units added. 2,100 is the number that was picked and you kind of need to ride with. But if you don't do planning or don't do the right planning, you aren't going to get things. You aren't going to get grant monies. You're not going to get transportation to your area. So Christy Malchow, I remember her when she was mayor, they were trying to go for the zero target. It was like Ken Gamlin said, oh, we need zero. And she figured out that, boy, if we put a really low number, we're going to hose ourselves. So they did with that first number, and just the sewer moratorium was not a real land capacity thing. It was just they had to shift their things around and get some overflow tanks and look at the gravity pipes and make sure that their pumping stations could pump enough sewage so we wouldn't have an overflow. So that's pretty much been resolved. They even did a smoke testing thing where anybody that had stormwater attached, and they had 43 of those identified. They fixed 16 of the worst, and they fixed all those. So SPW really does their planning. The city and SPW need to work closer together. North Sammamish Sewer Water District doesn't really have the growth. So please work with them, get the numbers from them. Don't just use the ones I verbalized today. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Wichter. We have 2 more hands raised. Mr. Eastman, I'm going to promote you to panelist.
James Eastman, Sammamish, Washington. Yeah, so the first hour and a half of the meeting, we pretty much recapped what's been going on in our city, not only the last year and a half, but really the past probably 6 or 7 years. And Mary just summarized it again very well. And it was us trying to stop this bus that's running us over. And about a month or 2 months ago, I gave a TDR talk and pretty much said some of these very prophetic things. And that's our assessed values have gone up 50% on our houses. This is unsustainable. The state has to kick in, and they will kick in. I was unaware of these targets being.
James, we lost you if you're still talking. All right. In the interest of time, technical difficulties are precluding James, so maybe he can try again. Let's move on to the third person.
Mr. Stickney, I'm going to promote you to panelist.
Very good meeting tonight, planning commissioners, city staff, David Pyle. This is Paul Stickney. I've got a few things to add based on what I've heard tonight, and then a few things to talk about for a potential solution to all these issues. First off, Commissioner Amato asked about GMPC. The highest class of cities is metro cities, that is Bellevue and Seattle. There are 4 classes, and then it gets into King County. Core cities are Auburn and Bothell and Burien, Federal Way, Issaquah, Kent, Kirkland, Redmond, Renton, SeaTac, and Tukwila. The high capacity transit communities, which used to be large cities in Vision 2040, are Federal Way, Kenmore, Lake Forest Park, Mercer Island, Newcastle, and some large PAAs in Renton and Shoreline. There's 19 cities in our city and town. Many of them, I've been in real estate a long time, and many of them are really small cities, Beaux-Arts and the Points. But here are some of the more notably sized cities. Clyde Hill, Covington, Duval, Enumclaw, Maple Valley, Milton, Normandy Park, North Bend, Sammamish, Snoqualmie. And several of those cities jumped at the chance to take more of the growth that our community did not. A little bit of history: the city's growth target for the first 4 years before the first comp plan was adopted was about 5,000 housing units. The 2003 to 2022 comp plan, our growth target was a little over 3,800 units. The 2015 to 2035 comp plan, our growth target was 4,600 units. And the 2024 to 2044, proposed growth target is 2,100. I heard comments on the condominium coming from the state and potentially doing a condo ADU. I will tell you that in real estate, one of the most troubling, nearly impossible situations is to have a 2-unit condominium program or project because there's not a majority. Enough said. When 2 people don't agree, it's a nightmare. I'll just mention that. We talked about town center minimum zoning. A zoning has a base of 16 units an acre. B zoning, a base of 8. C zoning, a base of 4. and the city's entire D zone has 240 units of the 2,000, and E has almost none. I'd like to talk about minimum versus consistency. What I want to talk about is regional guidance. Vision 2040 from PSRC had a comment on growth targets that said a growth target is the minimum number of residents and the minimum number of jobs that a jurisdiction is expected to accommodate by some future year. So it was minimum. I'm not talking what the state RCWs say. PSRC Vision 2050 gives guidance for aligning growth targets, and they say, in its review of comprehensive plans for certification, PSRC looks for substantial consistency of the plan's land use growth assumptions with adopted countywide growth. I've talked to the PSRC team, I've talked to the King County team, and there is a significant and notable policy shift of their intention. I don't know if there's any teeth, but the intention is clear. In Vision 2040, it saw growth targets as minimums. In Vision 2050, they want a city to get its growth target right and have that be consistent. Next topic to talk about, housing affordability. Rather than go into all the details, I'll sum it up. From 2003 until 2022, our two comp plans had slightly different affordable housing targets, but the targets from 2003 to 2022 were to build 1,307 units. What is interesting, and David Pyle is mentioned this, in the first comp plan, our city planned for two affordable housing ranges, 0 to 50% AMI and 50 to 80. In the second comp plan that we adopted in 2015, we looked at, and that's the King's we, 0 to 30%, 30 to 50%, and 50 to 80%. Summary, city planned for 1,307 units during that time, built 65 during that time. On the Puget Sound regional, on the King County page where your staff presentation today gave the Tableau table, I'm not sure I'm saying that right. I watched the meeting on the 28th and they told me something that helped me or everybody on the meeting. When you go into that table, it wants a name and a password. Just close that and it'll let you in. You don't have to give a name and password. Also heard, I didn't attend it, but I heard from a strong source that knows for sure that the Affordable Housing Committee meeting on September 29th did not finish its targets. So they haven't come up with a way it's going to work. I see my time's almost up. I've got some really good solutions. I'll reach out to each of you and chat. And again, thanks for all the information tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Stickney. And we have Mr. Eastman back. I'll leave it at your discretion, Chair Bachman.
Yeah, go ahead and let him continue.
Mr. Eastman, whenever you're ready.
Yeah, thanks. Sorry, my battery went dead on me unknowingly. But yeah, really, I mean, we're at a point where we can keep trying to stop the bus, or really we have 2 years to come up with a good comp plan and try to figure out what we're going to do and figure out solutions. So I hope starting now, starting with the Planning Commission, we do what John talked about in his common joint meeting, and that was use this comprehensive plan to come up with a futuristic outlook for the city and what it holds. And I hope we're done trying to weaponize everything, and I hope we start unweaponizing all the things that we weaponized. and come up with a real plan to deal with these issues. Thank you.
And there are no more hands raised.
Great. Anything else from staff? I see Evan has been listening in. David, anything else?
Other than thank you for listening tonight. I know it's a long meeting, and I appreciate the endurance of the commission and sticking with it. So thank you.
That's why we get paid the big bucks. All right, I will just mention to everybody, make sure you please take a look at the calendar and December planning, which is not on the calendar. Tentatively, December 1st and December 15th are, I think, the dates targeted, not formalized yet, but I know December planning is often a challenge, so pay attention to that. All right, I think we're ready to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor of adjourning, say aye.
Aye.
Right.
Opposed, no. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful evening.